Whether it be as a result of abuse, violence, combat duty, or terrorism, the results of trauma can be devastating. Suicidal thoughts, hypervigilance, social isolation, insomnia, rage and depression leave the traumatized person with the deep and unseen scars of post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm Jason Blankfield, a combat soldier who served in one of the world's toughest military units, operating deep in enemy territory.
And I'm Tal Hartuv, a survivor of a brutal machete attack in which I was stabbed multiple times while watching my friend murdered.
We invite you to listen in on our frank conversations. Although we have no formulas to make PTSD part of our forgotten past, we certainly both know from personal experience that no matter how debilitating PTSD can be, it is possible to not just learn to live with it or manage it, but to enjoy a quality of life. Disclaimer, neither of us are medical professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists. We are here to speak from our personal experience about what we know about PTSD. It's always strange where to start. How did we get here even? I called you one day and I go, Tal, how are you? And I said, that's a really strange question. It's like, what do you ask someone? One of the things that I speak to a lot of people with post-trauma, and one of the things that I don't know how to do is I don't know how to start a conversation.
Well, that's it for me. It was, for years, if somebody asked me how I was, I used to freeze, like I am now, right? Struggling for a word, because that is the most complicated question that can ever be asked. Because one of these things, as we're going to chat about our series, or in this series, PTSD does something to the mind. It mind bends our brains physiologically and obviously mentally, to the point for me. There was one time when someone asked me what my name was and where I lived. My name, I couldn't remember. I just couldn't remember what even I was called. So that's just, how did I personally get from that to now having a semi-articulate conversation with you? I mean, it's taken time, but
also for me, as someone who is sensitive, I know a little bit about you. I know your past. We've known each other for almost a year now. And I realize that it's not the right question. It's a loaded question. And I remember asking you, it's like, Tal, what do I, when I answer, I don't know what you've gone through that day. I don't know how you're feeling. I don't know what's going, through your mind. And then for me to ask, how are you? Either it's just a useless question that doesn't get an answer. And it's like, what's the point of asking that? Or it's a loaded question saying, actually, I'm doing pretty terribly. And then what am I meant to do from there? So one of the thing that started this was when I looked online and I started to read up about post-trauma and things like that, I couldn't really find anything that was real, that brought out the true reality of what post-trauma is. And I think that we've built a really interesting and strange relationship that can expose and reveal some of those things to many other people.
But it's also I think, Jason, it's not like a formula. Just because you got PTSD, you're going to have, everybody else is going to follow exactly in a box like the things I experience. There's going to be things that are similar. Some people are going to have some aspects of it worse than maybe I did, maybe a little easier.
But you agree that there's not a lot of open talk about it?
No, I don't think people, I mean, to be honest, if something had happened to somebody else, the same thing that happened to me, let's say before I went through, even, let's forget PTSD, somebody dies, there's a terrible tragedy. We don't know what to say to people. It's awkward for us. It's shaming. You don't want to trigger somebody. We're very, very uncomfortable. So I think one of the things that we've learned, or certainly I have over the last few years, it's only because of what I've been experienced personally that's enabled me to understand better what to say, or more accurately, what not to say to people who have been severely traumatized. And sometimes the conversation, it's not about words. Really, it's not about words. And this is one thing I learned, you said like, how are you? People don't know how to answer. Another question people don't know how to answer, like with all the goodwill in the world, you go up to somebody who's suffering, you say, what do you need? people don't always know what they need. So for me, one of the best things was like friends would turn up and they'd bring, I don't know, cigarettes, food, whatever. It was never asked what I needed. And I didn't care what they bought at the time. It didn't matter to me. I just wanted somebody to basically take control over a very, very shattered life. So words aren't always, we don't have to struggle with them. But I will say that one thing that is really, really helpful is that when you're in the position of being the caregiver or the friend or the partner, to say, I really don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. I'm your friend. That's all I can say. To say that, it's $1 million.
And I think that's how we started that conversation. I go, Tal, I have no idea how to start this. And it created a conversation like this where I think we spoke for about 20 minutes just on this subject of how do you start? Like where's the starting point and where does that lead us? So, I mean, I think that got us here, but let's just bring it back a second. Post-trauma is this concept that an individual goes through a traumatic event and that creates some sort of anxiety or some sort of long-term changes in that person, who they are. And also usually it can be debilitating at times, but it usually brings in some negative aspects into their life. And I know that you've experienced a lot of those. I certainly know a lot of people who have had post-trauma, are dealing with post-trauma, so work in this field. But from your experience, what are some of the things that kind of came to fruition for you in your life, and how did things change?
It changed a lot, right? Because first of all, I wasn't a combat soldier like you. I was a civilian. I was going for a walk. I was talking with my friend about Roman coins, and the next minute she was chopped up in the rosemary bushes. You know, I hadn't been trained in any physical way. So if we think about, and it's only after the years that I've managed to process this, the overwhelming nuance time zone is that it's one of disbelief. It's like, I mean, I'm extremely badly injured. I can't even breathe without being in pain. You know, I've got bones coming out of me, and despite that pain, something in my head is saying, this didn't happen. This is unreal. So the first sensation or fallout of PTSD for me was a disassociation. And even in the hospital, I could see all the nurses and doctors running around and they're talking about, you know, calling in my relatives, and I realized I'm going to be buried soon, that kind of thing. And it was just like, no, I'm in this zone and I feel like I'm covered with, you know, the plastic you wrap sandwiches in?
Yeah.
That's it. It's like I can't connect with reality. And that feeling of disassociation is total shock. That doesn't go away necessarily after even years. That takes a long time. So that was the first thing. Another thing that I felt or experienced really was avoidance. Now, this isn't necessarily conscious. It was subconscious for me in the beginning. Like the police come to the hospital, right? They have to interview because they have to find the body of my friend and I'm near death's door. And my mind, talk about mind bending. I was thinking of anything else, but I had this amazing ability that my mind split. On the one hand, I was being interrogated, or rather investigated, questioned by the police. And I had to keep very, very focused. On the other hand, I'd be looking at like the monitors above the bed, right, with the hospital, and there's all those little coloured lines. I think, oh, yellow's a pretty colour. Oh, pink's a pretty. Oh, let me just count the heartbeat. So I was doing anything but focusing on the traumatic event. So that was subconscious. And as the years went by, that avoidance, it became more conscious. It's like I would obviously self-meds, you know, drinking a lot. That's a way of avoidance. And in the end, it doesn't help, trust me. But we do everything. We employ everything, whether it's binging on movies or self-meds or being busy or drugs or whatever it is. Our minds are trained I think, when we react to a traumatic event, to think about anything else but. So I have disassociation, there's avoidance, hypervigilance, noise, any noise, whether it's just like noise of an aeroplane going overhead, a child like giggling, a chair squeaking, or just that constant white noise of just a dull crowd. All these things were terribly, terribly difficult for me. And as a result of not coping with noise and anxiety and fear that somebody's going to come up down the road and stab me again, there, of course, is the self-isolation. And that, by the way, Jason, that also comes from the idea that no one can understand me. You feel so odd, so isolated. And then that leads to, I'm not sure it's linear, but for the sake of this conversation, that social isolation, that aloneness in the world leads to, suicidal thoughts. I actually didn't feel sorry for myself, but because I could not think of anything else 24/7 and insomnia, I couldn't think of anything else but what happened. I wanted to have a reprieve from thinking about this stuff. So then I became focused on how to kill myself, when to kill myself, what would be the least painful way. And it's one thing, what do you call it? An avalanche, one thing rolls into another. That's just some of the fallout. And you don't have to be stabbed to have chronic PTSD.
Definitely not.
It can be a result of anything.
What's the line from experiencing that and then to saying, okay, maybe that's not what I really want, or that's not really what, because it sounds like even when I was in the military, we went on some pretty interesting missions, and it almost felt like I was in a movie. It didn't feel, many times it didn't feel real. On one hand, I was the most present I've ever been on the helicopter, and your heart rate's going through the roof, and you feel your whole body is tense and full of adrenaline. But it's almost like it wasn't me, it was someone else, and I'm playing a role, and then I'm going out and doing what we have to do. And there were certainly some missions where, we get body parts, or we see people on the floor in terrible kind of situations. And then for me, everything was automatic. So we'd been learnt a certain process, and you just go through the process and you make sure that all the T's have been crossed and I's have been dots. And then it would finish, and it'd almost be like I'm out of that role and I'm now back to Jason. It was almost two different types of people. But when I was listening to you, it's almost like, it sounds like that's, and from a little bit of reading that I've done, that's a protective mechanism, right? You disassociate because it's too much for the mind to understand. It's too much to absorb. It's too much to comprehend. Like what you went through and what other people are going through. You physically and mentally and spiritually can't take it in. But on the other hand, it's like you're here today and you're speaking about it. So what happens? What changes from I have to protect myself at any cost for the fear of something happening, to then being aware enough to understand that a thought is a thought, a feeling is a feeling, and now I can choose a different path?
If I knew the answer to that, I'd probably be on the best-selling author's book, right? Be another self-help book. I don't have concrete answer and formula, so that could probably be a bit depressing for people listening in. But on the other hand, given the magnitude of my experience, not being in combat, a woman, all right, and how severely I was injured and how brutal this murder was. And now that I'm semi-articulate, that's the hope, not the formula. So what has happened that has got me to this point today where we can have a conversation? And I think we should talk about this more in depth. One is the element of time. All right. You can't hurry your healing. Time, there is no replacement for time. Another thing would be, I'm not a doctor. All right. I personally I chose not to do medication, chemicals, pills. Didn't want that. I wanted to face it straight on. So I knew to face it straight on was going to be extremely difficult, but I was also awarded some very, very good therapy and some amazing friends and, trying to get back to a healthy routine. All these things, but everything took time. It's really baby steps. I had to get to the point where I knew it's either I go for it, I want to try and get some, back to some kind of quality of life, or it's just not worth staying around. That was my choice. That was how desperate I was.
How long did you sit with that question for? Was that something that was a one-time question that you posed to yourself and decided things are going to be different and I need to pull myself together and get myself out of this, you could say? Or was that an ongoing question that you kept on strengthening? Because you're here today, so we kind of know what the current answer is, but
it wasn't a one-off, because I'm the kind of person, come December 31st and everybody makes New Year's resolutions. I never do it because by January the 2nd they'd be broken. So I don't have that discipline. I don't have that resolve. I know where that leads me. So this was like an absorbing. I don't even know if I was cognizant of it at that time. But as the years have gone by, I can look back and say, this is what I was doing then. This was helpful at that stage. And that's why I'm here now. Because although I might have not realized it in a conscious level at the time, I think I can articulate what has been helpful and maybe preempt for somebody else who's not quite there yet, or they need a little bit of, what was it like for you?
Yeah, I think we'll go through the different types of therapies, but one of the things that I've certainly understood now much, much better, I'm a lot more humble in this aspect, which is most likely to get through post-trauma and to really get a quality of life back. Firstly, it's complex, very complex. It's very muddy. It's full of a whole different type, a range of different emotions, feelings, experiences, most of which aren't very pleasant for the person going through it, and also the person who may want to help or give some sort of advice or resolve to it. But also that it's a combination of so many different things. I think there's a lot of experts and there's a lot of people that push one answer or one thing that's going to, get everyone better and it's going to change the world. There's now psychedelics. There's, every month there's a new treatment. There's a new kind of idea that's coming to the forefront of mental health, of post-trauma that's going to change it. But what I've started to really get more interested in and to understand for myself is that the only thing that's going to help people is a combination of different types of therapies, of different types of resources, of different types of whatever it may be. Medications not only in the pharmaceutical world, but also natural supplementation, and we'll speak about that a little bit later. But once upon a time, I used to think you need to make a decision. It's all mindset and that's it. Today, it's like I couldn't have been more wrong in my hypothesis. It is complex. There's going to need a combination of therapies and treatments, and it can take time.
Yeah, it does take time. In fact, I wouldn't want to appear here. It's like some movie star, like everything's 12 years later, it's all great. It's not all great. It's really important people know, not so they feel sorry for me, to say the parameters of reality. I still have very bad days. I mean, even coming here to record this podcast, right? I go into the gas station, I want a cup of coffee. He makes me a cup of coffee. I knock it over. So I say to him, look, I'll clean the thing. Cleaning the thing. Then I say, can you make me another one? And he says, no. It's not. And so at that moment, it's like, I don't know what I would have done. Well, I probably do know what I would have done 10 years ago, right? But then I said to myself, I will not kill because I have to be in Tel Aviv. I'm going to hold myself. But I was aware. Why am I saying this? I still am aware of a rage. That doesn't go. We just temper it with how we learn. I learn. I won't say we. I am learning how to temper it. when I'm facing different situations. But I would not want anybody to think that, oh, it's all behind me.
Yeah, but here's something that I've experienced quite a lot recently is everyone goes through that.
For sure.
Not even people with post-trauma. And I think that sometimes when I'm having conversations with people, I listen, because obviously I get hundreds of calls a month with people who suffer from post-trauma. And they talking to me about how hard it is to have relationships, how they get angry, how, they have road rage, or how they get really down on themselves. And then I think to myself, I speak with business people, I speak with special force military guys and girls, I speak with a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds. And interestingly, they have the same issues. They have challenges with the relationships. I mean, divorce rates are through the roof. They get angry. You go drive out on the roads today and you see how much road rage there is and how many people are frustrated, and waiters that throw things at you or they don't want anything to do with you. So it's like, what do you think happens that makes it almost feel more unique for someone who's been through something very traumatic?
With the rage, and that's why I wrote a book. Sorry, this is tacky, but I wrote a book called The Rage Less Traveled under my former name. But rage, I think you're absolutely right. Still am, maybe less raging. If I look and see what happened, for me, it's the sheer helplessness of it all. To be held hostage, to be tied up, and your life is swinging in the balance of somebody. That is very, very rage-inducing, that you're totally at someone else's beck and call. It's almost like a newborn baby, right? Babies don't get born and go, hey, welcome to the world. I'm so glad to be here. They're crying, they're raging, they're screaming, they're helpless. So it's like a primordial helplessness. That's one thing. I wasn't in control, right? I wasn't in control. And when you're not in control, that rage connects with our fear. And everyone has that, right? Everyone. Even if they look like the most successful people, when you're on your own and you're sitting on your room alone and you really think about sometimes life and that we're all going to die one day and we don't know what's going to happen.
And no one has control over anything.
No one has control, and that is terrifying. That is terrifying. So when you have
But you can make a direct link between the event and...
Yeah, the fact that someone is messing with your life. I wasn't in control of what was happening. All right, it was another human being. I don't think it has to be a terror attack. It's people often say when somebody dies suddenly of natural causes even, right? Grief, it's the rage because we're not in control. For me, it was maybe exacerbated that I saw such terrible violence. When you see violence I think we need to specify, right? I'm watching machetes chop my friend up. And that very bloody, that carnage, that does something to our souls, all right? First of all, on the one hand, it scars us for life. Scars don't go, they're with us. It ages you by decades, And the other thing is, when we see violence, as well as aging, something happens that it connects with our helplessness of it all. There's a song in Hebrew, a beautiful song, and it says that there's things in the world. It's like a man talking to a boy. He says, "Son, there are things in the world that you're not supposed to see." And I think that's especially with people who have PTSD. It's also like a natural spiritual scar, because we've seen and we've heard death and carnage and blood and these things. This isn't life. This is death. We're created for life. So these things have a terrible, terrible impact on our soul and our mental health.
I heard an amazing story recently of an indigenous tribe. I don't know where I heard it, but basically, when someone goes through something traumatic or something that they weren't meant to see, or that were not built to see these types of things in many ways, they would come around with a group of people, a large group, and they would share their experience right after. And what the concept was behind it was that we don't have the capacity to be able to absorb everything that we saw. And so they would share with everyone there just a little piece of it. Now, whilst they didn't experience it, it was almost like their cup was overflowing, and that they would give a little bit out of their cup that was filled up to everyone. And they would sit together around the fireplace, and they would hug each other, and they would show warmth and love and care that they were there for each other. And I think that if I was to take it a step further, I'm sure that they weren't judging. It's like, this is what happened. Someone that we care deeply about went through something that is impossible for anyone else to understand. It's like, I remember when we first met as well, I was speaking about when you do a lot of talks, and I was doing a lot of talks about my time in the military. And after a while, I realized there was no real point talking a lot about my personal experience, because no one could understand it. You cannot put yourself in those situations. You can't through words get someone to feel what you felt, to experience what you experienced.
Yeah, but you know what? Let me cut you here, because that's one of the things I was questioning about, like moaning about in therapy, right? I made a list of my losses, and one is, I lost the hope of ever really being fully understood. And definitely there is that sensation, like, you weren't there, nobody knows, fine. And then I learned, and it was very valuable, like, actually, you don't have to have gone through a traumatic event. I mean, even in a relationship, right? Why do relationships break up? Because he doesn't understand me. She doesn't understand me. No matter who we are, nobody can ever fully understand us, no matter what we've been through. And somehow this hope, this exacerbated hope of being understood just because we have PTSD, we weren't understood before we had a traumatic event. So we have to kind of get real. And that kind of balancing out the reality is also very, very hopeful step forward in dealing with trauma.
Thank you for listening to the Mind Bending Podcast. Please remember to subscribe. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it with others that may benefit from it as well. On the next episode, we're going to be talking about different tools and strategies for those who are on the pathway of healing from post-trauma. And we want to thank you, the community, for giving us your time. And we're looking forward to continuing this conversation with you.